issues, projects, and future council meeting agenda items. It's a work study session only and allows the council to hear input from city staff. No action will be taken at this workshop, and there will not be an opportunity for public comment. This meeting is streaming live on Glendale's Facebook and YouTube pages and the city's cable television station, Glendale Channel 11. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, we are on. Good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of September 24th. Put the glasses on. 2024. This meeting is called to order. Roll call is not necessary. Everybody's here, so if you could take note of that. You want to go ahead and just get started.
Downtown Campus Reinvestment Project Update.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. We're going to put the update here in the first part of the presentation today. And because we have some kind of more technical things happening here, I'm going to ask Eddie to come up and to kind of walk us through this, and he can kind of describe to you on the pictures you'll be seeing on your screen. Eddie?
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is update number 26. I know many of you have seen the project in various stages over the last several months. And we've been pretty consistent about showing how things are coming along. I mean, right now you see a building structure pretty raw right now with just the steel as it was when it was first conceived. But I can assure you that things are going to be phased very quickly as we move along here. So today's update, here we go. So the site activities that you see today, and many of this is on from our webcam, is going to be increasing a lot of our labor, and specifically our steel crews. So our steel installation is going to be ongoing for the next couple months. That was a couple things we mentioned last update, which is 2 weeks ago. That's not going to change. So most of the work that we're doing now is phasing that work. So as you'll see, more and more deliveries are coming to the site. So there'll be beams. These are what you're seeing is what we call outriggers. This is some of the structural supports that will help support our exterior skin system, and then some of the relieving angles and so forth that are going around the perimeter of the building. So as you see more and more material arrive, it's being phased with the work that's being done. One of the things that we're doing right now is more prep. So it's more and more and more as we go along. So more prep is happening on the exterior of the building, specifically our slab conditions. So this is a picture showing the south side, south end of the building. And where you see the little dark marks that you're seeing there, those are where we're peeling that material off to put new material on, and we're reinforcing the beams around those edges. Here's an example of how that's being done. So our crews are out there working and reinforcing with flat plates, and it's a little tedious because they're reinforcing every one of these beams individually. So they're stitching and welding those elements together. So that work is ongoing. Last time we spoke, we showed you some trench work that's being done for our service entrance section. And our service entrance is where all our main power comes from, and then distribution happens from there. This happens to be in the garage, on the lowest level of the garage, and it was open trench before. Now it's closed up. These are a lot of the conduits that are supporting the new, or at least the renovated council chambers that we have. But you can see on the right side picture, there's still ongoing work with preparing where the new SCS will be set, and these are all the conduits that have been buried to support that. Last time we were here, we were just starting to outline where saw cutting was going to be for new plumbing systems in the lowest level of the building. So you can see this is in progress. It takes a little time to go through and cut out every single row where plumbing will be placed. And so this is an example of the process. So they mark it, they cut it, and then they move the components out, or at least the remnants of the slabs piece by piece. That's going to go on for quite a bit. We're putting in a new elevator, so we're going to take some time to do that. On the theme of bringing in natural light, in the original part of the concept was just bringing more natural light into the building for better work environments, even in the lowest level. So this is the old stairwell on the south side. We've increased a door opening that was existing there that went into some mechanical areas, and now we've increased it, and we'll have basically a skylight scenario at grade. So we'll bring in some natural light into the space. So just various ways of bringing a natural light on both ends of the building. Here's another example of how we're doing on the garden level. So this is where council offices are and the clerk's office. So this happens to show you how those windows have been expanded, and you can see already how much more natural light's coming into the space. So essentially that's where we are at the moment. It's a lot of detail work that's going on. There's a lot of shop drawing view in the background. But you'll notice over the course of the next several weeks that we're going to be ramping up more and more, mobilizing more crews out there, specifically on disciplines that are associated with steel, concrete work, and anything related to early infrastructure items that we can bring in and start to establish a rhythm of installation on that. One thing I did not show you in these pictures is our mock-up. We showed it a couple weeks ago. We're still working on that. Our mock-up is a tool that we use for the construction work to coordinate so we can understand how things are going to go together in the field. So it's one thing to draw, it's another thing to install it and see how we do that. So no pictures of that this time around, but more to follow as we come along. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Are we still looking at first quarter of 26 for completion?
First quarter of 26 is still on target right now. We're going to keep monitoring as things go along. I mean, it's a ways to go. Things could happen, but right now we're steady on 26. It's first quarter of 26. I believe we had February as our substantial completion date.
This particular slide that's up right now, that's the light well coming down from above through the garden level. Is that what we're looking at?
This is both, actually. You're seeing a combination of where the stairwell will be that takes you down throughout the building.
Stairwell?
And that's used to be an elevator, so that's being converted to a stairwell. And then you're facing west towards the garage, and that's the perimeter windows. And we're doing a similar, I can actually go back. I can show you how it looks from the amphitheater side. If you can see the large window opening on the lowest level, that's part of the same suite. And then two of those other windows to the right of that are going to be enlarged as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Are the locations for the departments set in stone at this stage, or are there still, moving pieces as to where, different departments are going to be located within the city hall?
For where Mayor and Council, for where we are at the moment, yes, we've established who's going on which floor and developed those departments and suites accordingly to that. I'm not aware of any potential changes or differences in the program setup for the floors.
Is there potential for changes of,
I'm not aware of any of it today at all.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think we have any other questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Zoning text amendment, ZTA 24-03, accessory use conditions, accessory dwelling unit.
Mayor, members of the council, here for item 2 on today's agenda. It'll be presented by Tabitha Perry, Deputy Director of Development Services.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This item was first presented at the August 13th, 2024 workshop. Council provided consensus to move forward with a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, for compliance with House Bill HB 2720. In addition, Council directed staff to return to a workshop session to discuss draft regulations. Since the August workshop, municipalities received the model ordinance drafted by the League of Arizona City and Towns. The draft regulations for the UDC text amendment is in compliance with HB 2720 with supporting language from the model ordinance. Today's presentation is informational and seeking any input from council with the intent to bring this item at a future city council public hearing this calendar year, as HB 2720 mandates for the ordinance to be effective by January the 1st of 2025. A summary of what HB 2720 mandates. There is no minimum lot size requirement. As you may recall, currently today, the UDC has a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet. Allowance for an attached and detached ADU units, with the option for a minimum of one additional detached unit, provided the lot size is 1 acre or more, and such ADU unit will be restricted as affordable. Also, an accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed the lesser of 75% of the gross floor area of the existing residence, or 1,000 square feet.
Mayor,
Yeah, hold on, go ahead.
I do have a question about the previous slide. I just want to clarify. Unit allowable size is 75% or 1,000?
Whoever's left.
I just
Whichever
want-
is less, correct.
I thought my mic was on. It is on.
It's on.
Okay. So, yes, that is correct, either or?
Whichever is less of the two.
The bottom line, whichever's less.
Oh.
So, Mayor, Council, so most
So,
likely,
in essence, it'll be 1,000 square feet or smaller.
Mayor, Council, that is correct. That's what I was
Okay.
getting ready to say.
All right, thank you.
There are some things that the bill prohibits. A city cannot require additional parking space for the ADU. The city cannot require the units designed to match the principal structure. And the city cannot impose more restrictive regulations than those required within the same zoning area or zoning district. So for an example, in development standards, the maximum height is 30 feet. So an ADU could go up to the maximum height of 30 feet. Relative to setbacks, for a front yard setback, depending on the zoning districts, it range from 15 to 40 feet from the front property line. So for the front yard setback, the city cannot regulate more restrictive for that. The lot coverage would be the same in which the zoning district allows. The only difference is that a city cannot require a rear or side setback to be greater than 5 feet. Proposed regulations for the text amendment. An accessory dwelling unit may have a kitchen or kitchenette as defined within the UDC or other city codes. No additional parking space or in lieu parking fee shall be required by the city to accommodate the accessory dwelling unit. Then also the accessory dwelling unit shall adhere to section 35.406 of the UDC, which is also outlined within the city code. But then also the ADU cannot have a separate driveway or parking area from the main principal structure.
Thank you, Mayor. So if somebody, even if, I understand we can't require it, but even if somebody wants to put a secondary access point, a driveway essentially to this unit, they're not allowed to?
Mayor and council, no, they are not.
That doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah, let me clarify, because she's got the same question I do. We can't require it, but if they have the room and it meets our particular code, we can allow extra driveway space.
Mayor and council, that is correct.
Okay.
Another example would be if someone wants to construct an ADU and they want to construct it with a garage, they can do that, but we as the city cannot require them to do that.
Okay, Mayor, but they can put a driveway then. What I asked first is if they want to put a driveway in to the ADU, they're not allowed to. Only if they put a garage in then, or I guess I'm not understanding.
Mayor and council, they can do it provided they meet the UDC requirements as defined in section 35.4006 and as council approved within the city code in 2023. It just needs to meet our requirements for how much asphalt or concrete that they can have in the front to accommodate to have the additional driveway. So we
Okay.
already have regulations in place that they will have to adhere to.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking through all these regulations that would be proposed as a text amendment, and the kitchen or kitchenette is a may have, maybe. But everything else that is proposed as a text amendment is shall be. The exterior design shall be. Accessory dwelling unit shall have no separate address. Accessory dwelling unit shall have no separate water or utility meters. Everything else is shall, which means it's required. It's only the kitchen or kitchenette that is may. I would like to know why we are not making that shall rather than may.
Mayor, Council, there's a couple of things of how staff looked at this, in addition to what the bill states. So you can't regulate more restrictive than what you would regulate for a single-family residential. So it's implied if you build a single-family residence that you're going to have a kitchen in it. It's implied, but through the UDC, we do not regulate that you have to have all those different components that makes up a kitchen. So if someone was to construct an ADU, we're basically saying based on the property owner's needs or desires for that ADU, they could construct it to have a full kitchen, or they may construct it to have a kitchenette that would not be a stove, but they could have a microwave, they could have a refrigerator, they could have a hot plate. So we wanted to give that variation based on the need of the property owner, as well as ensuring that we were not putting ourselves in a position to where we would regulate something that goes against the bill itself.
Well, last time we met, I believe that you said that council had the discretion to make that shall as opposed to may. And quite frankly, I would like to see that be a requirement. Now you're telling me, according to the UDC, we can't do that. Is that correct?
Mayor and council, council has the right to regulate it, whether they wanted to have a kitchen or they wanted to have a kitchenette. But we also have to be in compliance with the building codes and how that is defined for a kitchen.
Okay, but you didn't give me an answer. I don't know.
Out there. I'm sorry. So, Mayor and Council, so ultimately, this is the regulation that we are proposing, but Council does have the right to, if they want us to regulate it, to say that they shall have a kitchen, you have the right to do that. The way we're proposing it before you today is to allow that flexibility for the property owners.
Well, that's what I'm pointing out. Everything else is shall happen, except this, which is a may, which means there's discretion. I think it should be a shall, and then it should be required as well. And I'm up for discussion by council as to how they feel about that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Huggins, Ms. Perry, could you give us the description of what our building code says as a kitchen or a kitchenette? So if we are going to consider requiring it, what exactly does that mean?
1 second, please. Mayor and Council, if I may paraphrase this because I don't really have that language before me, it just basically says that you have to have an area that is identified with as a kitchen with a minimum of a sink.
Okay, so Mayor, if I could, a hot plate, even a hot plate would be a kitchen?
Optional.
The Mayor and Council, the 2020 votes would be the difference between whether or not someone could utilize it as a kitchen with a stove. If it's less than that, then that gets back to just having a hot plate, which we would classify as being a kitchenette.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if it's something real simple, like if I was going to add a dwelling in the back, and my parents were or a relative was we were going to put them in back there. We were going to share meals together. We were going to do everything together, but they would have the option to have some privacy for watching westerns and going to bed separate from our dwelling, so they wouldn't necessarily have to have a full kitchen. I could see how some people who are wanting to build that say, we don't need a full kitchen, so please don't require it. But we're saying, and I'm assuming this is to give them that option to say, you can have one if you want. You don't need to, because there may be a lot more of that particular situation where it may be a family member who's going to come in to the main dwelling for meals. I'm looking at it like that, in my opinion.
Mayor Council, that is in the previous workshop. It's similar to the example that I gave, that if you have someone that has dementia and you want them to reside in the ADU, but yet and still for eating purposes, they would come into the principal structure. That was part of the thought process of giving that flexibility.
Mayor, thank you. So I don't think anybody's saying that we would necessarily want to require a full kitchen. That's why I asked for the definition. So having running water someplace outside the bathroom, I think, is a good thing, not a bad thing. So, I mean, you know, there's be a place for people to be able to wash their hands and do other things that you would need to do around, even if you're living, if that's your living space, other than having to go into the bathroom to wash a coffee cup, to do things like that. So I'm not saying yes, but they need to put in, you know, a full kitchen. I wanted to understand exactly what the building code says a kitchen is. If it's just a sink, I don't really see that as a much bigger investment for the person building the ADU either.
Joyce?
Let me add to that. It's not my intent that it be a full kitchen. Kitchenette is fine. But Councilmember Tomachov is right. You know, do you want to, even if, I heard you say, even if there's a hot plate, that classifies as a kitchenette. Is that correct?
Mayor Council, it would classify as a kitchenette. Yes.
Okay. So I use a hot plate, and I need a pot, and I need a plate to put the food on. Where am I going to wash it? In the bathroom? So I think no matter what it looks like, I'm not saying a full kitchen unless somebody wants to invest in one, but at least a kitchenette should be a requirement, and it should be shall be rather than a may, just for health reasons.
Mayor Council, based on that clarity, you will have to have one running water. So if it pleases council, we can revise this to say that an accessory dwelling unit shall have a minimum of a kitchenette as defined within the UDC or other city codes. That meets the intent of
That would
council.
be fine, because you do need some place, if you're eating in your ADU, you do need some place to wash just essential equipment. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts is the way the conversation started, I thought you were going a different direction, but for a sink to have in the kitchen with a microwave, if they choose to have a hot plate, I'm good with that. I would not support making it mandatory that we put in a stove. I remember a couple instances when I lived in Texas, seemed like 100 years ago. It wasn't that long, but it seemed like it. There were some people that were trying to do something similar. They had elderly grandparents that really weren't in a position to take care of themselves, and they had natural gas for heating, and they were finding constantly that the stove was being left on and not being lit. So I wouldn't be in favor of requiring an oven at all. If it was a kitchenette with a sink, I'm perfectly good with that. I don't think we're stepping on the state law. I think we'd be okay there. You know, I don't really like what the state did to us, but we have what we have, and we just have to make the best of it. I mean, it's not going away. We just have to figure out what's best for the city. But I do like that. I think that's a good compromise. But
Did you want?
no, you. No.
I think
Mr.
Ray had a
Turner.
clarifying point, and then I'll go.
Okay, well, I started with you. Why don't we just go with you, and then we'll go to Ray.
Okay. I'm inclined to wish that we required either a kitchen or kitchenette, so change may to shall, kitchen or kitchenette as defined by our UDC. And while I appreciate that initially it may be a case where you have a family member who would be taking meals at the main house, down the road, and what we always have to be looking down the road, and there wouldn't be another permit opportunity necessarily when that would change to a non-family member who then is going to be bringing in, you know, a dormitory refrigerator, a hot plate, the microwave that was mentioned, those sorts of things, and might be creating life safety issues. And I think we need to look farther down the road than just the initial use. So, and we also should be looking at the quality of life that we're, you know, the standard that we set for quality of life in our community. So I would like to have us say shall, agree with Councilmember Clark, shall have a kitchen or kitchenette as defined. And then maybe we need to look at the definition of kitchen and kitchenette, and maybe it should be more than just a sink, that it maybe should be at least the capacity electrically to handle additional the appliances that one would require. Whether we can force them to purchase the actual appliances may be a different question, but at least have the electrical code available, the electrical service available for that. You know, maybe we need to look at that. I'm not sure, but I would like to go with shall. Thank you.
I'm in agreement with that as well. I believe it should be shall. Is this working?
It is.
Okay.
Bend it up so you directly,
Yeah, it is. I'm talking right at
way
it.
better.
Okay. I agree with what the council members have said, that it should be shall. When this bill was being discussed, I was pretty engaged with it, and there was some discussion that it was going to be not allowed to be regulated by the city. And that is not in the bill, as I just read through it again. It does define what it is, but it doesn't describe specifically we can't do it. So I would be all in favor of making it a shall. In my opinion, the purpose of this bill, as was the sponsors stated, was to help with housing. Well, if that's the purpose, then you need to have housing with a kitchen. It just doesn't make sense to not have housing with a kitchen. And so I think it should be required with a kitchen. Thank you.
You have a question or statement?
Mayor and Council, yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on one point that I think is worth mentioning, is that in the bill, it does, when it defines alternative dwelling unit, accessory dwelling unit, it refers to it as a self-contained living unit, blah, 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 that may include its own kitchen facilities. I think at a minimum, in order to follow that definition, I don't think we could require a full kitchen, and we can debate, you know, how much we can require, but I think at a minimum, the definition kind of restricts us from doing that.
Mayor,
Yes.
look, I don't care if it's a full kitchen. That's not the point. The point is that people need some mechanism to clean up after themselves after they've eaten. And call it a kitchenette, call it whatever you want. But I think that's a shall that should be in our code, because I do think it's a health issue with regard to who's ever using that unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I think by definition, though, I mean, it's auxiliary dwelling unit. They're calling it a dwelling unit, a place for somebody to be essentially living, maybe having meals inside the home or maybe not, but at least to be able to make a pot of coffee or something. I mean, it's called a dwelling unit. You should be able to dwell in it, I think, by definition. That's what it's called. So if we can figure out a way to not run amok of the state statute and require it, because the whole, as Councilmember Melner said, the whole reason that the legislature ran this bill was to try to help with affordable housing. So in that endeavor, you should be able to at least microwave something, make a pot of coffee, wash your hands, not in the bathroom. I think those are all things that would need to be available as a dwelling unit, not a bedroom, a dwelling unit. Thank you.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Just clarification on that definition. Accessory dwelling unit means a self-contained living area. Self-contained, to me, means you need to be able to cook and wash and do all those kinds of things. So I still propose that it include a full kitchen.
Well, I guess bottom line is it doesn't make any difference what we say. If the state law says something, we have to obey or abide just by the state law. Is there a way to clarify this for us? So we're not going through this exercise in vain?
Mayor, Council, I think I understand what you're asking for with the shell. I can work with the city attorney's office to massage the regulation in hopes of meeting the intent and probably provide a definition for a minimum of a kitchenette to kind of hopefully it would please the intent of council from today's workshop.
Well, because all this discussion, you know, I'm looking at it differently than everybody else. If you had a microwave and a heating plate, something else, each one of those could draw 15 amps by themselves pretty easy. If you have a outlet and one circuit off a 15 amp breaker, there's no way you're going to be able to run that. And so I'm sitting here thinking, is there a way that we can require like 2 or 3 separate on their own breaker so we don't run into the electrical problems, which you know, consistently in the past, that's where your fires start, by overloading the system. We're not saying that we're going to put in hot plates. We're just saying that you have to have this many circuits within this area of a kitchen or kitchenette. That could solve some of those safety issues too.
Mayor, Council, to your point, the building code does address a lot of those components that you just described, but I think it would be best for me to get back with the city attorney's office and kind of massage that regulation as it relates to the kitchen for a future meeting.
Okay. I think everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, next.
Mayor, Council, I'm not done with the presentation.
Oh, I thought you were.
No.
We were done.
Okay, I accept. I'll stop. Okay. So the next bullet point is that the exterior design, roof pitch, and finishing materials shall be complementary, but they're not required to match the principal dwelling unit. And that is in compliance with the House bill. Okay. The accessory dwelling unit shall not have a separate address from the principal dwelling. We have double checked with the post office. That would not create a problem for mail services or for 911 dispatch for fire and police. Okay. Accessory dwelling unit shall have no separate water or utility meters.
Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you,
One
Ms.
second,
Perry.
she's talking.
Thank you, Mayor. Does that mean we cannot require it, but if somebody wants to put a separate meter on there because they want to run it out and they want them to pay their own utilities, are they allowed to do it? We just can't require it? Is that what that means?
Mayor and council, what the regulation is basically saying, it's basically in the UDC today that council adopted, is that they will not be able to have a separate water or utility meter from the principal structure. There's an option that one can do a sub meter, but also through council today, we can remove that requirement. And if a property owner will have the resources and they want to have a separate water and or utility meter, then they can have that option.
But Mayor, but we would need to remove that from the UDC?
Mayor and council, through the text amendment, yes, we would remove this regulation, not requiring that they cannot have a separate meters.
So somebody, because if you're renting it out, you know, you don't want to have rent it out to a tenant that's going to keep the thermostat at 62 all summer, and you know, I mean, I would want to be able to have it metered separately and have, even if the bill has to come to my address, I would just I guess you'd have to have a separate address. I guess those two things actually go together, because
Yeah.
otherwise, how are you gonna
Right.
bill?
Mayor and council, the way the address will appear, so the principal structure has the main address, let's say 5150 West Glendale Avenue. The accessory dwelling, if it's detached, it will have like unit 1,
Okay.
almost like a multi-family
Or a
development.
letter, whatever.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So let's say that I put one of these in my backyard and I'm gonna rent it out to somebody for a year. I can put a separate meter out there for them if I want to. The city just can't require me to do it.
Mayor and council, that is correct.
Okay,
It'll
thank
be
you.
optional.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to explore the logic behind you can't have a separate meter or you must and that sort of thing. So if I just understand, did we reach the agreement that they may have a separate meter? Is that where we're at?
Mayor and council, the discussion on the table is to remove the requirement that they cannot have a separate one. So if we remove it, then the construction of an ADU, the property owner will have the right just to have the one water and utility meters for the entire site, or they could have separate ones.
Right. So I agree with that. I think it should be the option of the property owner, but it also will be the expense of the property owner too, if they decide to have separate meters or choose to go with a sub-meter. And this goes to keeping things affordable. On one hand, if they have their own utility meter and utility bills, then they can regulate their usage and maintain a lower bill, but they'll also incur the basic cost of having service, which can add up to $50 or $60 a month probably across all utilities. Whereas if it all goes to one address, then you only have one of those account charges for each of the utilities. But I think we can leave it up to the property owner and manage it that way. So I think I'm good with where we're at. Thanks. And I apologize. My hearing is especially bad today. And so if I miss things, forgive me, please.
Do
Thanks. Yeah, Jerry, that.
I think you're having the same problem I'm having.
Anytime.
So,
Go ahead.
Mayor, so I guess, do we need to give you a consensus that we want to have that removed from our UDC as part of this discussion? Is that? where
Mayor
we're at?
council, that's correct.
Okay,
I
I support it.
support that.
Yeah.
My question is, are you going to say they may have separate services, or just eliminate the one that says that they can't?
Mayor, council, my thoughts as of right now is that we will eliminate it. So if we're silent on it, then that just gives them the option to have it or not have it.
I'm seeing a lot of heads go yes, so I guess you're good there.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we're here. If the accessory dwelling unit is attached, located within the same building as the principal dwelling, the principal dwelling shall not be altered so as to appear to contain more than one dwelling unit. This regulation is in the UDC as of today. And just to give you an idea of what the regulation is saying, so if you do an attached ADU, then so that you don't have the appearance as if you have two units, the accessory dwelling unit could have the door located on the side or the rear of the principal structure, so it doesn't give that appearance from the front that you actually have altered the appearance of the principal dwelling unit. Another alternative, if someone is very creative, they can do some type of architectural element to continue to give that appearance as if it's one principal dwelling unit. A non-conforming or permitted accessory structure converted to an accessory dwelling unit shall meet all requirements for an accessory dwelling unit. So an example of that would be if you have an accessory structure and let's say it has a side yard setback of 3 feet. Our regulation as proposed would be a 5-foot setback on the side and rear. That would be an example where the individual or property owner would not be able to convert the accessory structure to an accessory dwelling unit. So in order to convert the accessory structure, it has to adhere to the regulations for accessory dwelling units. And the last one, I definitely would need some input from council on this one. Accessory dwelling units are prohibited to be used as a group home.
I agree with that, Mayor.
It'd be a small group if you did.
Makes sense.
I think throughout.
Hold on.
A couple, at least one or two other items. The draft we've seen discusses what is long-term versus short-term, and I think the number that staff has picked has been 90 days.
Mayor Council for long-term is 90 days or month-to-month, and that's coming from the model ordinance that came from the league.
I missed part of that, but month-to-month would only be 30 days.
Mayor and Council, I'm only smiling because I had that conversation with the city attorney's office this morning. But yes, the way that it's written in the model, if someone was to enter into a month-to-month, so say for an example, I'm looking to relocate back to Florida, and I am renting from them, but I'm not certain of exactly when I may get a job offer to move back. I would just do month to month. So it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, but it's a month to month lease with the notion of saying that would be more long term. If it's less than 30 days, that is how they are evaluating it as being a short term rental.
Less than 30 days, you said?
Yes.
Okay. There seems to be a conflict in there, but if less than 30 days is short term, because where it comes into play is with the basically the Airbnb concept and the requirement that if from this point going forward, if you're doing the short term stay, Airbnb or VRBO or whatever, then the property owner has to live on site, correct?
Correct. Through Mayor, that is correct.
Okay. So requiring it to be 90 days before you would have, there's a conflict there. So I do believe that if we're having less than 30-day tenancies, that the Airbnb VRBO concept, that it's not an infringement to require the property owner to live on the property as well. That way they deal with whatever negative consequences there may be, just like their neighbors deal with it, and that would reduce the number of negative consequences. But it did seem like there was a conflict in the draft I saw as to whether that would be the case. And the other thing, we have to see, what is it, our goals may be different in different parts of town or neighborhoods, like downtown, where maybe you're trying to make sure that we have some Airbnbs and that we have some affordable housing for people who work down here and all of that, but that may not be exactly what we want, other neighborhoods would want to have. So, they may be looking at it more from the family member concept or something like that, but we have to write this in a way that it works for everybody. So as long as they don't have to live on site if they're 30 days or longer, I'm fine with that break, using that as the break. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
I just had a question regarding this accessory dwelling units prohibited to be used as a group home. Have we had legal look at that in terms of what our federal mandates are? Because I thought we were told in the prior workshops that we have very little control over some group homes. And then the question also comes up, what if it's already a group home and they want to add an accessory dwelling unit? Can they do that? So I think there's some other questions we have to answer about federal mandates, what we can and cannot require, and what happens when it's already a group home.
Mayor, Council, I did discuss this regulation with the city attorney's office with Jim Gruber as well as Michael Bailey through Jim Gruber. The thought process, if you have the principal structure, and let's say that it was approved to allow for a group home, that would still stand. We're just basically saying that if you want to have an accessory dwelling unit, that you cannot utilize that as being a group home. So from my understanding from the city attorney's office, they can support this regulation, provided council give consensus to keep the regulation in place.
If I may, Mayor, so then if it is already a group home, they would be allowed to do an accessory dwelling unit?
Mayor, council, if a single-family residential lot has an established dwelling unit that is being utilized as a group home, as far as the bill and the regulation, yes, they will still be able to construct an accessory dwelling unit. They just will not be able to get permitted to use that accessory dwelling unit as a group home.
Let me throw another one in there. I thought the owner had to live on the property.
So, Mayor and Council, so let me give an example how that potentially can look. So, I'm operating a group home, and I need management needs to be on site. So, the primary structure is for the group home, and as the manager or the property owner, I could be living in the accessory dwelling unit. Point being, the accessory dwelling unit is not being used as the actual group home.
Yeah, no, I understand it, but my question is I thought earlier it was said that the state law requires the owner to live on property, the owner, not a manager, but the owner.
I stand corrected. You are correct.
Okay, so that takes, I don't know how many group homes where the owners actually live in the group homes. I don't know of any. So that may all be for nothing anyway.
I would answer the question.
So, Mayor and Council, I will dig in a little bit deeper into the group home aspect of it. From a staff standpoint, our goal ultimately is not to be in a position where we're saturated with group homes based on the regulations that we already have in place for group homes. With the notion of this bill was put in place to help with the housing crisis. But I can go back and reconfirm with the city attorney's office to make sure that we're not missing something by prohibiting group homes on site.
Thank you. Good. Great. Yeah, to that point, on the, if I missed it, fine, but it does seem to me that it would be good for the housing situation, both for those that require group home care and others, that if the accessory dwelling unit could be used by live-in staff or somebody like that, maybe not people entrusted to the care home as clients, but as far as staff or ownership, being able to live in the back could free up space in the main house for an additional one or two clients. And we know that there's a need for group homes in our community because we keep getting more of them. But it also, by providing an opportunity for the staff to live on site, frees up another dwelling unit in the community for someone else to live in. So just take that under advisement as potentially what we might be looking for there. And then the other question I wanted to bring up regarded multi-story accessory dwelling units, particularly in regard to setbacks from the property line. So can you explain what the setback allowances are, and then how would that come into play if somebody had a multi-story dwelling unit, accessory unit, or if they were putting their accessory dwelling unit above an existing garage, for instance?
Mayor and Council, in that example, the way the bill is written and as proposed in the text amendment, the city could only require the minimum setback of 5 feet from the rear and the side. If the property owner was being a good neighbor, and if it's a bigger lot, he or she can opt to increase that rear and side setback. But regardless of that height being at a maximum of 30 feet, the city could not regulate or mandate an increased side or rear setback beyond 5 feet.
So then, if I understand this correctly, 30 feet could actually be 3 stories, or with a flat roof, perhaps?
Mayor, Council, that would be stretching it, maybe 2 stories, depending on how you design it.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, even if we just go with 2 stories with a pitched roof, so your neighbor could build that within 5 feet of your property line and
Nothing you can do about it.
and block sight lines and block shade or sunlight. You know, if you have a swimming pool that's right there and you want sunlight in the afternoon or whatever, they could. Is there anything that we can do about that as far as limiting the height of ADUs or?
Mayor, council, the answer is no. But best efforts of staff, if an individual comes in and shows their site plan for the accessory dwelling unit, to the best of our ability, we would encourage them to consider if there's a way for them to increase the rear and side setback if they can, just to be a good neighbor. But once again, we cannot require them to be greater than the 5 feet.
We can attempt to be persuasive. That's it, just to call on their better angels. Well, that's too bad. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Laura?
Thank you, Mayor. Is it just an assumption that these are going to be in the backyard, or I don't see anything in 2570 that prohibits somebody from, as long as there's no HOA or architectural committee or something like that to deal with, that there's nothing in the bill that I saw that would prohibit somebody from putting one of these really anywhere on their property, front yard, wherever, as long as they meet the, I mean, we have front setbacks, which this doesn't talk about, so as long as they can meet those. But I mean, I haven't heard any discussion about that, but I just wonder, is that something that someone literally could do?
Mayor, council, the answer to that is yes, they could. So what that would look like is, early in the presentation, I indicated that the front yard setback would have to adhere to the development standards within that zoning district. So if I give an example of saying the zoning district says that the front yard setback has to be a minimum of 20 feet. So that accessory structure could be built with the front yard setback of a minimum of 20 feet, but then the side would have to be a minimum of 5 feet.
Mayor, so 5 feet from the driveway or 5 feet? I mean, there's, front yards.
Border.
Yeah, from 5 feet from.
Mayor,
like,
council,
what kind of barrier?
It's from the property line. So when we talk about setbacks,
right.
we're
That would
doing
be
it
easy
all
to
from
do.
the property lines.
Okay, that's going to be very interesting because there's no design really, I mean, people could plop up just about anything they want to then in a front yard.
Stay long.
Don't get any ideas.
On the same subject then, earlier we discussed on slide 5 that the exterior design shall be complementary to the primary dwelling, but it can't be required to match. So then complementary is a value judgment. Is there a definition, a way that we can measure complementariness?
Mayor and council, is subjective. The example that I can give you is one time we had a property owner who has a red brick dwelling unit, and they wanted an accessory structure, and the regulation indicated that it needed to match the primary structure. Because the structure was in the rear of the property and you couldn't see it from the street, we basically allowed the property owner to build it with a brick veneer. So from afar, it still looks as if it's red brick, but it was actually a brick veneer. So that would be an example of where we're trying to say it can be somewhat complementary, but it doesn't have to match the primary structure.
Okay, and I can see that, yes, that's complementary, but what if they just decided to stucco it and color it a brick color? Would that still be complementary? I mean, as you said, it's subjective, and that concerns me because it's not measurable. And, I mean, we allow steel accessory buildings on site now, where we used to require them to be stucco to be complementary, and I'm not sure that we require that anymore. But so the concern was raised, well, a lot of people now are using these seagoing shipping containers, and converting them to dwelling units. And could somebody use a shipping container in their backyard, maybe seen from the street or not seen from the street, and convert that to a dwelling unit? How would that have, how complementary would we be able to measure that, and what they might have to do to make it complementary? And then now with a 5-foot setback, can they put one on top of the other and use those as 2 accessory dwelling units 5 foot away from my property line?
Mayor and council, all good points, but from a staff standpoint, based on the House bill, we're very limited in being able to regulate it. So staff would just have to do their best with working with property owners and encouraging them to, at a minimum, have an ADU that's complementary to their primary structure. Our hands are pretty much tied based on what the House bill states today. As of right now, we have approved 6 ADUs, and for the most part, they are complementary to the primary structure. So we're hopeful that property owners want to continue to bring value to their property. So instead of us regulating that it has to match the primary structure, that hopefully that they will make good decisions and listen to some feedback from staff as it pertains to maybe some materials or colors that will be complementary.
And thank you, Tabitha, and please, I'm certainly not blaming anybody on our staff for how difficult this is going to be to work through. And I would love to be able to trust that every property owner out there would like to, work in the best spirit of things. But I also, having watched the legislative process for many years, I realize that a bill gets passed and then the next year amendments get proposed. And what I'm trying to do is to lay the groundwork for us to be thinking about what types of amendments we might be looking at that can make this bill more workable, still accomplish the goals, but be more workable, and to protect the quality of life in our neighborhoods, which is, one of our most important responsibilities. So if staff is making a list, or if our government relations team is making a list of things that are hard to work with in this bill, let's add that to it. And then also, if internally we have if there's any way to make complementary less subjective, like complementary in material or color or texture or whatever, then perhaps we could work with that internally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This applies to every city in the state, correct?
Mayor, council, that's correct.
Okay. So there have got to be cities like Paradise Valley and Scottsdale that are freaking out about this. Because the way it's written, people can put just about anything in their backyards, front yards, whatever. Are any other cities writing some text amendments to regulate what they can of this new draconian state law? And have you seen any other cities' attempts to regulate what they can?
Mayor and council, there was a meeting, the Valley Partnership, that multiple cities engaged in to have this same conversation, and the same concerns was brought up from the directors and the deputy directors as a whole throughout the state of Arizona. Because of the time crunch. Could you speak up
just a little bit?
Sorry.
Thank
because of the deadline, all cities, for the most part, was waiting to get the model ordinance. So we are trying to see what other cities are doing, but I just want to remind council that we need to have something in effect by January the 1st. So with the modifications that we brought before you today, my understanding in general, most cities are going to follow the model that was presented from the league, and then just build upon that so that they can have something adopted by January the 1st. Because if you don't have something adopted by January the 1st, then you can basically do or construct an ADU anywhere.
So my follow-up question would be, okay, everybody's going to rush to have something before the end of the year. Can that something, once it's takes effect as city code, can it be amended in the future?
We can.
Mayor, council, it can, and
It
hopefully.
can or cannot?
It can, and hopefully as we continue to come back with before council with modifications, text amendments within the UDC, we will bring that back before you with additional modifications to the ADU based on what we find out from the league.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I went back to the actual bill, and what the bill says on line 29, a city is prohibited from requiring that an accessory dwelling unit match the exterior design, roof pitch, or finishing materials of the single-family dwelling that is located on the same lot as the accessory dwelling unit. So the word complementary, this, what we have in our PowerPoint, is proposed language for our UDC, is that right?
Mayor, council, that is correct.
So could we find maybe a word that's different than complementary and maybe not so subjective?
Mayor and council, I can work with the city attorney's office as it relates to that as well. When I put in the language to say complimentary, I think the city attorney's office was a little, worried that I was probably, going a little too far out there with it. But I can work with the city attorney's office to kind of see if we can find a more suitable word that would be in compliance with the bill and have a definition that describes it.
So I guess my especially for the ability for somebody to be able to put these things basically anywhere on their property as long as they meet our setbacks. My concern is the containers and things like that, where I don't know whether, and I'm looking at you, Mr. Gruber, that whether we're able to, because I don't see it in the bill anywhere where the city can say that it has to be constructed, or the original, the original intended use was, like, if you want to buy, I know you can buy like prefab places and stand them up, or it can be built on site or something like that, but that would exclude the use of storage containers, because I wouldn't want to be driving up and down my street and see, people living in storage containers all up and down my street. I understand we want to do what we can about affordable housing, but we have to be mindful to protect the property values of the people who are already here. So I don't know if there's some kind of language we could massage into this. It's not going to get us in trouble, but that I don't see anything in the bill that says that we can't do that. That we can't say that the ADU has to be, its original purpose is to be a dwelling unit. So storage containers wouldn't qualify. Don't know whether we can do that.
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmanshoff, yeah, your points are well taken. The statute doesn't allow us to require that certain aspects of the ADU match, and so that kind of what you're describing, I think, was the attempt of staff to find some lesser standard where we still could have some kind of regulation around the appearance and what the ADU looks like. And I also appreciate the comments that, the term complementary is subjective, and that was our discussion when we went over this. One, not that it at least I think adds a little bit of comfort for me, is that typically if you are going to have a court situation where a court's construing this language, they'd look to, if there's no definition in the ordinance or the statute, they'd look to the dictionary definition. So we discussed what that is, and it talks about enhancing the qualities of each other. So it does provide a little bit more of kind of a structure of what complementary would mean for staff to evaluate.
Yeah, the other problem is if it meets all codes, it's really hard to stop it. Although for somebody to meet all codes in a Sealand container is not the easiest thing in the world to do either. So I don't know as though we're going to see our first one up in Arrowhead.
They'd have to get through the HOAs. Not everybody in Arrowhead has an HOA, but most of them do.
Yeah. Again, this was a thing that Mr. Lee and myself spent a lot of time at the legislature trying trying to
I
fight,
know,
and
I
it was falling on deaf ears.
Yes.
Really bad.
And just if I could, Mayor, though, I mean, just because it maybe wouldn't be allowed in my neighborhood, because I do have an HOA, doesn't mean I don't care about what could be allowed in other neighborhoods, and that's my concern, is that we, I mean, while I'm elected by the people of Cholla, I work for all the people of Glendale, and I would care if they started, putting storage containers in people's front yards where it's not prohibited by an HOA, so, thank you.
Mayor Council, that concludes the presentation. You've given us a lot of input and direction, so I thank you.
All right, thank you. Next item.
Presentation on the city's investment portfolio.
Mayor, members of the council, here to lead the team that will be presenting on item number 3 is Levi Gibson, our Director of Budget and Finance.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Happy to be here today. We're going to do our annual portfolio review on our investments. Today I have Ash Mehta, Director of Investment Services for Public Trust, and Megan Elgin, our Controller. As an overview of the presentation today, we'll first review the Arizona State Statute with regard to investments. Ash will then give a market update and a portfolio review. And with that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Elgin.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Our investment policy invests our public money. It is governed by the Arizona Revised Statute 35-323. It sets a maximum maturity of 5 years, and then investments that we're eligible to invest in are U.S. Treasury obligations, federal agency and instrumentality securities, corporate bonds, prime commercial paper, and interest-bearing savings accounts. Our investment policy objectives per our investment policy, and in order of priority, as you can see listed, are safety, liquidity, diversification, and lastly, yield. For our investment strategy, we have 2 portfolios. One is a liquidity portfolio, which focuses on short-term, which are investments under a year, and allows to have more liquidity and also to help us manage to meet our cash flow needs and to maximize short-term returns. Our other portfolio is the core portfolio, which is for investing up to 5 years, which is longer term and is managed by public trust advisors to a benchmark following the city's investment policies. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Mehta to give us the market update.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Thank you again for having me. We are going to do a brief market update. A lot of what the city invests in is correlated highly to what the Federal Reserve does because we are investing in mostly what is guaranteed by or implied guaranteed to by the U.S. government. Just a brief history of our relationship. We've been the portfolio manager for the city since 2015. We work closely with Megan and Levi as well as other members of staff to identify dollars that have been identified or but not yet spent to maximize the return on those dollars sitting in the accounts. Hopefully we can move on to the next page here. So we're going to talk briefly about the market and how that is going to affect your portfolio. Next slide, please. This data and this deck was put together about 2 weeks ago, and if anyone is familiar with what has happened last week in the market environment, this is all very outdated. So a lot of activity in the last couple weeks here. So one of the things that we have been noticing and the Fed has been monitoring is inflation, as well as the labor market, to decide whether or not it's time or it is capable to cut rates, the Federal Reserve implied rates. We're going to talk about the inflation. Obviously, everyone knows what happened during the COVID pandemic, where core inflation went up to about 9.4% year over year, which means baskets of goods for you and I as individuals were costing about 10% more than it did for the prior year. Obviously, as the Fed raised rates in early 22 and perpetually through 23, that came down to a more manageable level as spending decreased and saving increased, causing that rate to revert to around 3% right now. And as the Fed looks at it, they'll use a different basket, which is the gray line. That gray line is the PCE, also known as the overall price change for not just individuals in urban areas, but nonprofits, corporates in general. That number does not tend to go as high as the personal or as the CPI because it does not include food and gas. But another statistic that the Fed monitors when making decisions regarding Fed rate cuts is the employment market. This is a historical look back to 2016. We see the huge spike in unemployment during COVID, obviously, and as well as the gray line is the participation rate, where we saw 3% of the workforce leave the employment seeking arena in 2021. That number has creeped back up, but is still not as high as the numbers prior to the pandemic. And obviously you see the unemployment number has dropped down to that 4.3%, but is beginning to creep up, spurring some of the reasons why the Fed did cut rates by 50 basis points last week.
Do me a favor and pull your microphone closer.
Apologies. Can you hear me better now, Mayor?
Way better.
Thank you. This graph is a representation of the movements that have occurred in the yield markets. The top line, the darker line, is as of 1 month ago, or as of 2 months ago, actually, or July 6th. The yields in the near term or short term yields were at about 5% or 5.25, and longer term rates in a negative inverted yield curve were lower at that 4.75. A month later, as the economic indicators, including labor, began to show signs of weakness, the market priced in the fact that the Fed would cut rates in the next meeting, but they were not sure of how frequent that and how extensive that cut would be. So as of right now, as of this data, we were pricing in a cut of about 25 basis points. The Fed did shock everybody last Thursday by doing 2 rate cuts. Next slide, please. Obviously, all of these conclusions are also outdated as we've seen new economic data, but some of the current and newer conclusions we have come to is the Fed was very aggressive in the rate cuts because they did not want to be held accountable for waiting too long like they did on rate increases. This is no indication that 50 basis point rate cuts are going to be the norm. They will probably revert to a 25 basis point cut for the next meeting as well as the last meeting of the year, bringing our implied federal funds rate to 4 to 4.25. The markets are preparing for a soft landing, which does mean that we hopefully do not have any recessionary impacts other than a brief increase in unemployment. And really the concerns for the city and the like and others are going to be where are we going to find the investment opportunities at the yields that we've had in the past year or so. So a brief overview again of the investments.
I have a question.
Yep. Go ahead.
You just cited a lot of federal data, but as we know, for example, the amount of people employed, they've had to adjust those numbers downward. So how accurate is the information that we're getting out of the federal government? How accurate is it? I don't believe it is anymore.
Mayor and Council, that is the only data we are able to use to make our conclusions. I can't speak to the accuracy, but we do see that there have been significant revisions to prior prints, and I believe the market also does factor that into where they begin to price things, where we are also operating as purchasers of those securities. So we are not held only by the Fed, as the market now has also began to push the agenda for the Fed as well.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Do you also look at other market indicators, for example, gold? Gold, a lot of people talking about gold this week. Gold is rising pretty quickly. It's risen about 30-something% over the last few weeks, which is generally an indicator of heading into I don't want to say bad, not a robust economy, a decline in the economy. Then fuel prices, there's a lot of weird things happening all at the same time. So how do you actually take all that and figure out what to do?
So, Mayor and Council, thank you for the question. There are a lot of speculative investments outside of what we can purchase for the city. We don't tend to look at them as their performance because they are cyclical. Fuel is very cyclical. Gold demand is cyclical based on a new number of factors. We typically tend to look at what the federal funds rate is and how that's going to change over a period of time. And in our aspects, up to 5 years is where our universe is of where rates are going to be.
I guess what I'm asking, though, is how do you decide whether you want to make short-term or long-term decisions with this much uncertainty? I understand what we can and can't invest in, but, you know, I mean, if you're looking at saying, you know, I mean, at some point you have to decide if rates are going to continue to decline, then long-term, at least for, you know, bond for us, that's probably better than just saying, if we think things are stable, we're okay with shorter term, we want to play, you know. So, I mean, at some point you have to make a decision on what you think's going to happen, even for the investments we're allowed to make, right?
Mayor and Council, we work with the city to uncover where cash flow is. And so if there is an opportunity to push money out where there is a benefit in the yield curve, we will advise the city to do so. It really is contingent upon when those funds are being used. Now, that is with respect to the liquidity portfolio, because that is the shorter term portfolio. So we can work in that 0 to 1 year range typically, and we do have the ability to go out longer than that in that portfolio as well. We just do not. The core portfolio is made up of almost mandated money that we have to hold. So we aren't, as an investment portfolio, we are not trying to make a lot of money. We are protecting the money, and it has to be there for debt service, et cetera. So any dollars that we can make with those with those reserves is a benefit to the city. We don't necessarily want to tell you to push it out longer or put you in a position where you would not be able to have the liquidity there. So we operate in the cash flow model that is given to us.
Okay, thank you.
So to follow up, you tend to be more conservative in trying times and a little bit more aggressive in good markets?
Mayor and Council, we do not time the market. The core portfolio is managed to a benchmark, a strategy that is defined, and we don't really deviate from that when it comes to the core portfolio. The liquidity portfolio, again, is also a living thing, which is a function of the city's cash flows. If there is an opportunity, if the banks are paying less than a money market, we will obviously take the money out of the bank, and move it to the money market that is higher yielding. If we know we're not using the funds for 3 to 6 months, they're earmarked to be spent in 6 months. We will buy a security that will maximize the yield in that time frame.
Okay.
It's not necessarily what we're predicting is going to happen in the market. We're going to use what we think is going to happen in the market to modify the strategy of what we're doing with the dollars.
Okay.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mayor Council. Snapshot of the funds. This is the combination of both portfolios as of June 30th. The current portfolio valuation, total value is $295 million. And that fluctuates on a daily basis, obviously. But as of June 30th, it was $295 million with net income in the last year of $8,700,000. That is a increase of about $5 million from the prior fiscal year, where earnings were $3.7 million. That is, again, a function of the high federal funds rate and treasuries paying north of 5% for most of the calendar year. As you can see on this graph, we have not deviated very far away from U.S. government and government-backed securities. We have about 85% of the portfolio in U.S. treasuries and agencies, and we have about 9.5% in corporate bonds, the remainder filled in around cash and money market funds. The next slide will show us the maturity distribution table for the entire portfolio. This is, again, for all the funds. we have a graph that shows in the 0 to 3 months all the way out to 5 years the amount of the portfolio that will be maturing. We have a very consistent ladder of maturities that are able to provide liquidity for the city when bills are to come due. This graph is specifically for the liquidity portfolio. Again, that's that shorter term bucket of 0 to 1 year. We have a total balance of $110 million in this account, made up of about 92% U.S. government obligations and a few outside money market funds and commercial paper positions. This portfolio returned about $5.7 million last year. $5.4 million last year. Again, that was the main benefactor of the higher yielding securities that we were purchasing in the 0 to 1 year time frame. Next slide. In this liquidity portfolio, this will show you that we've staggered out the maturities over the year, half of the quarter of the portfolio, every fiscal quarter maturing. And as the city decides that it doesn't spend down some of those proceeds, we're able to push those out once we've addressed the cash flows. The core portfolio, this is the bucket of money that we have to hold on to for debt service, et cetera. That portfolio is currently at $184 million. Again, very similar structure to the liquidity portfolio. We are able to go a little bit heavier in corporate because there was opportunities out the curve that we were going to get some spread to U.S. Treasuries. 81% government, 15% corporate, the rest in money market cash. Because this portfolio is longer term, there's very minimal in the 0 to 1 range. And again, a lot of the maturities are in the 1 to 5 year range. You can see here by this graph, we have about 38%, 33% maturing in the 1 to 2 year time frame, 21% out in the 2 to 3 year time frame, and the remainder out up to 5 years. In the minimal credit that we do employ in this portfolio, we do have our own credit team that does look at every single corporate issue that we purchase. They are available to talk to anybody at the city if they wanted to talk to them. But just in the case that we are buying corporates, we do have our own in-house credit committee that will review all the purchases that we make. And our strategy looking forward, we will continue to work with the staff on a weekly basis. We do quarterly reviews of the portfolio. And again, we do speak with the portfolio managers every 6 months as well. Are there any other questions for me?
I do have a question. All those dates up there were 6 days short of 3 months old. How much difference is there from when these were produced 3 months ago to today? Is there any major differences?
Mayor and Council, yes, the securities that we have purchased have increased in value due to the drop in interest rates. So those dollars would be higher. I can't tell you the significance of the value being higher, but they would be higher based on market valuation alone because of the rate cut.
All right. Question? Question, Ray?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It looks like you're doing very well with our investments, so I appreciate that. Just one question had to do with how does our return rate compare with, say, we had invested with the state funds? You know, they have their own investment portfolio, and the state as a whole, a lot of cities use that as their investment portfolio. How do our rates of return compare to what they're doing?
Mayor and Council, you do, I believe, still have a position with the state LGIP, local government investment pool.
Okay.
The local government investment pool functions as a one-day liquidity option, so there is no duration. So they are going to be, in this current rate environment, they were outperforming. Excuse me. However, they did take a 38 basis point drop when the Fed cut the two cuts. So they are going to move in line with the Fed rate cuts. So I believe that our portfolios, as they are, will over time outperform the daily liquid.
Okay, thank you.
If I'm reading this right, and I'm looking particularly at slides 17 and 19, is it normal that the rate of return on the core portfolio would be less than the rate of return we're getting on our liquidity portfolio?
Mayor and Council, no, that is a function of the elevated rate environment in the short term. Longer term securities have been typically yielding in that 4 to 4.25%. We've had that inverted yield curve over the last 2 years that has been paying everybody a fairly drastic increase in the short term to be liquid because of the higher Fed funds rates with impending cuts in the future.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, that's all we have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council item of special interest, ADA accessible and inclusive playgrounds.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report, John Kennedy, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon. Bringing back an item that was raised, a council item of special interest by Councilmember Tomelchoff. The item is surrounding playgrounds and specifically ADA accessibility of those playgrounds, as well as the inclusion aspect of playgrounds. The analysis would include discussion on how the city's playgrounds meet current ADA compliance standards. Also, it would be a budget impact analysis to recommend improving playground surfacing accessibility. We currently have 3 different types of playground surfaces in sand, engineered wood fiber, and poured-in-place rubber, or a combination of any of those 3 in our playgrounds. And then also a budget impact analysis to identify and develop an inclusive playground in 1 or more council districts. So the resources estimated to take approximately 40 hours of staff time to complete the analysis for this council item of special interest. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions, any discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. So what is the difference between and I think one of my residents, one of my constituents is here. What is the difference between accessible, inclusive, and then adaptive? I think that is something I want to make sure that I understand, that we understand, and that what the idea is, so that we're offering ways for all of our residents to play.
Excuse me, sorry, I had a fly here. Mayor and council members, excellent question, and that's something that we could get into a lot more detail as we do an analysis. But in essence, the ADA accessibility has to do with breaking down barriers and just meeting a legal standard of being accessible. The inclusion, which would really include, is kind of inclusion and adaptive can be interchangeable terms, but really that goes above and beyond the ADA accessibility standard and creates more engaging play for people of all ages of different abilities. So really, ADA is kind of the legal standards. Inclusion is making the playground a lot more engaging and enticing and more enjoyable for folks of all different abilities.
So, Mayor, if I could continue. So there's been some discussion, at least among the people in Sierra Verde, which is one of the Sierra Verde residents brought this to my attention, that we don't really offer any options for, especially for children with disabilities, to be able to enjoy our playgrounds, at least not that I'm aware of. And a lot of the playgrounds are inaccessible. I mean, I understand the surface, and I think everybody here knows I hate the sand on the playgrounds. But inclusive, and then there was some discussion. Inclusive would mean, for example, the discussion was about toddler accessibility. But no, the children don't have any disabilities, but they're small. So they need things that are safer for children of that size and that they can reach and climb on without, putting themselves in danger. And that adaptability would be things that children in our community could participate with, maybe even pretty severe disabilities. They could still access playground equipment and play on our playgrounds. So, and I know there's been some discussion about Sierra Verde possibly. Ms. Baraga had contacted a resident about talking about inclusive. And I wasn't sure, because I wanted to make sure I understood that, first of all, we have to have this discussion before we can do that. And secondly, does that mean, inclusive mean just something that's more open to everyone, or is that something that's intended to offer amenities to children with disabilities?
So, Mayor and council members, so, our current playgrounds have various levels of different types of amenities within them. And some of them will have some amenities that would be deemed inclusive or adaptive, where folks perhaps in a wheelchair or other disability might be able to use a piece of equipment. But maybe not everything in that one playground is inclusive. So you could design and implement playgrounds at various levels that have only one or two or three different inclusive elements to them, or you could design a playground where it is exclusively designed for all inclusion type options, and then you could do something all the way in between. So some of our playgrounds do have some inclusive options on them, but we don't have anything that is specifically designed solely to be considered an inclusive or adaptive playground, if that answers your question.
It does, Mayor. And so if I could continue, do you mix? Do you put like regular playground equipment and adaptive playground equipment? And because I think the worst thing you want to do, especially with children with disabilities, and my son did this when he was, I think, 5th grade is the year they ran a program at Peoria. I'd love to see Glendale adopt this through our parks. In the summer, they had Peer Pals, and he was 5th grade, so he was one of the older kids, and they had Peer Pals. They had the summer program, but they had kids who'd been trained through this Peer Pal program they go to a couple meetings, they try to get the kids with disabilities to engage with the other kids, so that there's sort of a bridge between, instead of saying, okay, all of y'all who can't do this, go over there. And so the idea is I don't want to advocate for separating it. I want it to be that anybody in our community is able to play on the playground, and they're able to play together on the playground, or at least in the same space, so we're not separating it. So I just want to be clear about what the intention is.
Yes, Mayor and Council, that's an excellent point of view. It really comes down to a philosophical decision when designing a playground. Something that we did with Heroes Park Playground, we worked with the designers to make sure that there are some inclusive aspects within it. But we really stressed that we didn't want to alienate one group from another, because that's an important part of it, is where the social interaction. So you're not just stating that the adaptive or inclusive playground, you have to be off by yourself, and you can't commingle with different abled bodies. So our approach in that design was to make sure that we had aspects to reach as many abilities or disabilities as possible. If you were to design a playground specifically for only with inclusion or adaptivity in mind, that would create, you'd only want to locate that in a situation that might be able to support drawing that type of a group setting. You might need more infrastructure in place, more restroom facilities and or parking and or other infrastructure might drive people from a larger location to come to that destination type playground for that particular audience. So that could all come through a study, through this analysis, if that's where we move forward with.
Okay, well, I very much would like to see this happen, and my intention was to hopefully maybe get this done and back to us in time, that if there was a consensus of the council to move forward with putting some more adaptive, inclusive play areas wherever we would decide, how many ever we would decide, that we are able to at least start doing this next budget cycle. So that was what my intention was of doing this now. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. All right.
Mayor. We just need a consensus of the council. Again, the idea behind this CIOSI at this point is just the council person is asking for us to do this research. If there's a consensus of the council, we'll do it, and then at that time when we bring it back, we can talk about the budget impacts and the wheres and the whats and all of that. If council is agreeable to that, staff will go back and do that. It's going to take about 40 hours. If you're not, then it just would stop here. So I need kind of just to hear the consensus of the council, if you don't mind.
My understanding, Councilmember Tomachoff's looking for price is going to be part of it, because we have to know what it's going to cost us, duration, how long. I totally agree with the fact that I don't believe that you should separate and have challenged kids only playground. I don't believe that, because a lot of these kids have brothers and sisters that are very healthy, and to keep them all in the same area, I think makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more sense for the parents too. So Yeah, I'd like to see it come back and give us some options and ideas and cost, no matter what park it goes to. Is there a consensus on that?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, city manager report.
Mayor, members of the council, just 2 items today on my report. You know, the city of Glendale puts a lot of energy and a priority on having a safe work environment throughout the city, and something we work on a regular basis. And there's some real benefit to doing that. Obviously, it helps provide an environment for our employees to do their work in a safe way, which then also reduces down the risk of injury. But it also provides some monetary value in that it also can help lower our insurance cost and increase our productivity and help us with retention. Even though we put a high priority in that, the leadership team felt it would be good to go through and maybe put some additional resources and energy towards evaluating our safety programs. And so in October, we are kicking off a new safety task force that we think will help achieve a lot of the outcomes that we're looking for. We've hired an outside consultant to work with us. We'll be appointing representatives from all of our departments to kind of represent their interest. They will get trained in the area of safety. And then what they will do is walk through collectively, jointly reviewing all the department safety priorities and policies and procedures. They'll interview stakeholders, and then really more importantly, they're going to make sure that we are properly ensuring their safety through the right allocation of budget resources. Sometimes there's areas that need to be fixed, but they fall through in the budgeting process. I'm really confident this is going to really prove to provide some great yield on our time and energy going into there, and we'll certainly keep the council informed as we move forward. The second item is regarding the regional Emmy Awards. So the Southwest and Rocky Mountain Region Emmy Award nominations were just released. And as a reminder, this makes up the area of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and Southern California. And I'm proud to share that Glendale has been nominated for 2 Emmys in 2 different categories. First, the comprehensive video called Your Guide to the Final Four Frenzy was nominated, and then the video Breaking Sports Broadcaster Barriers was also nominated. The gala for the Emmys will be held in November, where they will announce the winners, and I want to again congratulate our communications staff as they prepare as they continue to produce really high quality material on a regular basis. And it's been really, if you've heard in my reports, we've seen this on a fairly regular basis, that we continue to get acknowledged by our peers, both regionally and nationally in that area. And that does conclude my report.
Thank you. We have a city attorney's report.
Nothing at this time, Mayor.
Thank you. Council items of special interest. Councilmember Baldonegro.
None at this time, sir.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Melner.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomachop.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner. Wonderful. Vice Mayor.
Nothing, Mayor.
Well, that's a grand slam. Yeah, I have nothing also. Can I get a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, vote nay. You guys have it? Do have it? With that, this council meeting is recessed.